wanted to build upon a major theme that sits within lots of my YouTube videos and talk about why we need much more science and scientific thinking in the hypnotherapy field. Throughout the years working in this field, there's been an ongoing, this running debate that I'm often pulled into, whereby art versus science is hotly debated within the hypnotherapy field. And as I've stated on my college hypnotherapy Facebook forum numerous times before, the two are not and should not be portrayed as being mutually exclusive. Art versus science, it is a false dichotomy. As someone who champions science and evidence-based hypnotherapy and an advocate of healthy skepticism, I promote this notion of critical thinking in my field. Many suggest to me that critical thinking is flawed and that we are less creative as a result. And I disagree. I think it's more creative to consider a wider range of choices and to look at information in more depth. And those favouring science and evidence-based are often portrayed in a very particular way that I think is inaccurate. So a while back, when one of the updates on the brilliant XKCD website touched upon this in a really funny way, I had to share it. I think it sums things up perfectly. I'm going to share it here too, so here you go. I love that. Among the comments, I also wrote a quote by the seminal hypnosis researcher Clark Hull, who back in 1933, he stated that research on hypnosis is complicated by, and I'm going to read his quote, the inherent difficulty of the problems involved, the fundamental elusiveness of the phenomena, and the consequent subtlety in the experimental controls. These difficulties are so great that to enter seriously on a program of investigation in this field is almost to court disaster. Now, Clark Hull still had a blooming good go, and I love and massively respect those who have attempted to evade such scientific disaster, carefully employ adequate controls, and study the potential of hypnosis, often in the absence of a solid definition. Now, without doubt, it's no mean feat attempting to apply scientific rigor to the study of hypnosis. I know this from personal experience. The same is true of the field of psychology in general, not just us hypnosis professionals out on the fringes of the psychology fields. Raymond Cattell once wrote, psychology is a trickier field in which even outstanding authorities have been known to run in circles, describing things which everyone knows in language which no one understands. So much of this approach, this scientific approach, is alien to the field of hypnotherapists that I guess it's easy to therefore snub it, which many do. It's important to understand that psychology itself, is considered by many a science that studies the human mind and behaviour, that involves systematic observations, experiments, and testing of hypotheses to understand how the world works. It's a logical approach that scientists use to prove or to reject a claim. And there have been plenty of debates about whether scientific methods should be conducted in psychology or not. Some psychologists create their own theories, mostly based on obvious, to them, assumptions and observations of recurring events, even upon their own professional experience sometimes. While on the other hand, there are psychologists who believe that this type of methodology to be wrong, and they prefer using scientific methods to seek out the underlying reason for behaviors. It's near impossible for either way to be 100% correct, but you can take measures to draw more accurate conclusions with the use of these scientific methods. And that brings us onto this notion of facts versus common sense. We usually depend upon our common sense to understand why people behave the way they do. And we tend to think that the reasons for people's behaviors are very obvious, when in fact it's not necessarily so. Using common sense to learn about psychology, it's a widespread mistake that people make, and it's less likely to give you accurate conclusions. Different people have different intuitions and views, usually born out of varying life experiences and perspectives. So depending on them only leads to psychology being more of a subjective matter, which many question and some consider to be the wrong approach, outright. The question is, why do we resort to intuition to make assumptions about human behavior? And I think the reason is because we often believe what we see. But sometimes appearances can be deceiving. An example of this is that, the earth looks flat to us and thus could lead us to believing it is in fact flat. But science has proven that statement wrong, it's incorrect, though the message and proof has not reached some ardent flat earthers. The field of hypnotherapy has a great many equivalents to such flat earthers, those who still claim hypnosis as an altered state of consciousness, those who still explain hypnosis as in terms of a subconscious and conscious mind, those who only ever teach one singular model of hypnosis, and those who do not offer up a critique to the approach or the favor or the way in which they favor and teach. And that's why it's important to incorporate scientific thinking into psychology studies, because it's far more reliable than merely basing it upon people's gut feelings. Some things that they're actually filled with bias and we make poor decisions. They're not quite as benevolent and as accurate as we may think. Science suggests that. You might like to refer to my previous video about the conscious and subconscious mind, where I examine that further. One thing to remember is that people's minds are forever changing, so making a theory based on observations of behavior and intuition can be pointless. Two different people with the same mental illness may show symptoms in different ways, so seeking out the fundamental ways the illness can be aided through scientific methods can be proven to be more helpful, though of course it's not universally the same for everyone. Nevertheless, common sense is not always wrong, but you have to be aware of our own, your naive nature, your own bias, and decide whether to trust your thinking in certain situations or not. Using science, you're able to carry out studies that prove an intuition wrong or right using a much more accurate approach. Why is the scientific approach so important? Well, scientific theories are the basis of science and offer the researchers a direction to work towards when looking for explanations. Most psychologists were guided by scientific methods before conducting their research in order to help them find their answers, because psychology is very complex and requires an extensive knowledge on that topic, which is why any study firstly requires a review of the existing literature. My own PhD, you've got to do a literature review first. But for example, about 3,500 self-help books are published every year, according to Arkowitz and Lilienfeld. Some of these books are effective for treating depression, anxiety, and other psychological problems, but about 95% of all self-help books are untested, according to research by Gould and Klum, Gregory and colleagues, Rosen and colleagues. Recent evidence suggests that a few may even make people worse. Haif and colleagues, Rosen, Salerno, all studies that demonstrated that. Many popular psychology researchers and authors don't take all scientific methods as seriously as perhaps they should, and this results in huge flaws in their practices, their teachings, their methods. In the field of hypnosis and hypnotherapy, the constant rehashing and revamping of the same materials, lacking in solid evidence, is what keeps the frontline field so absolutely out on the fringes of credible psychology. It's said that scientific methods are very uniform as a way of collecting data, interpreting outcomes, creating theories and so on. But you have to meet certain standards in order to be able to say that research is scientific. Firstly, the research has got to provide the same results when repeated over and over again in order for it to be considered true or accurate. Secondly, psychologists must form a detailed and exact hypothesis of what they believe will happen given certain situations, and they have to carry out tests to support or disprove their hypotheses. And thirdly, a standard theory is one that can be argued wrong, with strong evidence in order to avoid confirmation bias. That is, falsifiability or refutability of our hypothesis or theory is the inherent possibility that it can be proven false. It's called false if it's possible to conceive of an observation or an argument which negates the hypothesis. Lastly, researchers should provide simple justifications for their conclusions so that it's easy for the majority to understand. If you look at these standards, you can already see, scientific methods provide guidelines to ensure that information going out into the world is as precise as possible and safe for naive thinkers, and allows room for rejection. But it prevents bias. The major reason for opting for scientific methods is because these methods are usually free from personal or emotional bias. Any psychologist, hypnotherapist, or psychotherapist exclusively using personal experiences to reach an outcome and focusing upon what they already believe, they run the risk of blinding themselves to other possible outcomes. And it's completely normal to have personal bias. This arises from personal beliefs, cultural beliefs, which all of us have. For example, a religious person may not believe in Charles Darwin's theory of evolution because of their own religious beliefs. When conducting research, they will only look for information opposing that theory and overlook the ones supporting it. So, that's known as confirmation bias, which many lay researchers have the potential to be disposed to. And this leads to a false understanding of their research, but can be avoided by following strict scientific methods. This is because when collecting and analysing data respecting the scientific method, there are specific rules that eliminate bias. They make the outcomes more objective rather than subjective by putting proven facts alongside the conclusions. I've seen hypnotherapy organisations organise a research project to prove something that they already believe strongly in, using their own graduates and members as study participants and interpreting the results themselves, then claiming it to be science. It's nuts. Researchers are said to feel more confident using correct scientific methods because they believe they escaped any personal influence and only stuck to the facts. Of course, this doesn't mean that the research is free of errors. There may still be errors, but you can rest easy knowing that bias is unlikely to be one of them. Plus, they're going to undergo peer review and get scrutinized as well. Overall, it's safe to say scientific methods are more reliable and provide scope to grow and expand the researcher's knowledge. They aim to reduce errors and bias from results and create more sensible information for the general public. Psychology without scientific methods would potentially just be opinions. Now, this is just a simple, basic, entry-level explanation that I've attempted to put in simplistic terms and not assume that everybody listening to me is going to understand some of the fundamentals of science and psychology. But it brings me onto the field of hypnotherapy. It's been my experience over the past couple of decades that hypnotherapy training is filled with anecdotal accounts from trainers explaining methodologies filled with intangible facets, lacking in strong adherence to evidence base, and very rarely with any attempt to create familiarity with the literature supporting the field. The major contributory academic authors, theoreticians underpinning notions that fuel and feed the practical skill set. Just recently, a graduate of my college asked a question of a very well-known hypnotherapy trainer online about the conscious-subconscious mind. And I want to share with you this direct quote that was in reply to that query from the trainer. My course is designed and structured to ensure that my students qualify as safe, effective hypnotherapists with a high degree of self-awareness. It's not designed to be an overly academic program. It's not always necessary to understand the depths of the how in order to know something works. I don't understand the programming of my computer, and yet I can use it effectively. The same applies to my brain. But you're not selling training to be a computer expert. And also many of our patients and those who use our services do not, I repeat, do not know how to use their brains effectively. And I suspect this particular trainer very rarely actually used their brain either, to be honest. And this is such a cop-out. It's just lazy in my opinion. We need science. We need to be understanding the importance of evidence base. We need this, hypnotherapists. We need to at least be aware of this and let it inform our stance and position. And then we offer up some critique. There you go. Thanks for tuning in. Do subscribe to this channel. Get the latest video updates as soon as they happen. Send you my very best wishes. Goodbye for now.